Hello and welcome. You're here with us on Times Now, and today I am in conversation with the team behind Budget 2021. We have with us today Finance Secretary Mr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey. We also have with us the Chief Economic Advisor Dr. Subramanian. Thank you very much, both of you gentlemen, for joining us here on Times Now. Mr. Pandey, let me ask you first about the GST revenue, because that was the first news that came even before the budget announcement, and that came as a big surprise. 1,20,000 crore, fourth month in a row when above 1 lakh crore as the GST revenue. What is the reason, and is that going to be the trajectory from here on, sir?
See, the GST revenue, as you have said, that during the last 4 months it has shown improvement, and then the improvement is on two counts. One is that, of course, the economy has picked up and is further picking up, the recovery which is taking place, and that is also getting reflected in the collection of GST revenue. Another very important thing that has happened, that for almost about last 1.5 years, we have been working on certain structural changes within that GST, the system, the way people file returns, the way people take input tax credit. So those are the things which we have done, and also the kind of data analytics, and of course we use artificial intelligence. But on data collected, not only the GST data, but also from the income tax, from the customs, from the banks, and once you do an analysis over the data collected from the various sources, you can clearly figure out that who is paying taxes and who is not paying you the taxes, and therefore we have now the capability to identify that which are the spots where we need to pay certain attention and make them compliant. And this is precisely what is happening. During the last 2.5 months, we would have investigated not many of the companies, it would be in the range of few thousands. Just imagine, on a tax base of 1.2 crore companies, or the GST, the registered units, we could identify just few thousand, the errant ones, which were not paying the taxes which they were supposed to pay. And either they were understating or they were overstating to make somebody else evade the taxes and pass on the through the fake bills or through the the fake input tax credit, which others used to take advantage and pay us a lesser tax. So once that structure has been put into the GST system, today that is getting reflected in the higher collection of the revenue. Okay. So that is the reason why in addition to the pickup in the economy, in the recovery, we are also getting the advantage of a system which is becoming more and more compliant. Okay. The law. So once the law becomes compliant, one other important factor is that if your system is, let us say, a large number of people are non-compliant, then what happens is that those who want to be compliant, in order to remain competitive in the business, they also slowly slip into this non-compliance regime, and that is a very, very dangerous, because it is going to impact your collection for all times to come. So the whole emphasis, our emphasis is that you should make a system in such a manner that the people are compliant, and once a large majority of people are compliant, then naturally anyone who is not compliant, he's a kind of outlier, and outlier can be dealt with separately. So this is exactly what we have done.
So after the COVID shock, it seems at least the GST setup is getting back on its feet. In a situation like this, will you recommend further rationalization of the GST rates?
So before I respond to that specific question, let me just take a minute to outline, I think, what I think is a really very, very good budget. For me, this is the first budget of the decade. And it actually lays the foundation for not only growth to be very, very robust in the coming year, but also lays out the foundation for growth to reach back to 8% plus, in this decade. I think there are a few important steps that have been taken. If when history looks at this budget, it actually will look at for I think three things. One is it's a signature moment in terms of the healthcare spending, huge increase, almost 140%. Also, the scheme that has been announced, Atmanirbhar Bharat Swasthya Yojana.
Yes.
And if you would recall the Atmanirbhar Bharat, the Ayushman Bharat Yojana, and is having impact. So in that sense, this is actually an important signature moment. Secondly, if you look at the financial sector, which even before COVID was, there were problems. And now, with the privatization of two public sector banks, the bad bank situation, enabling that in the private sector, insurance, FDI actually being relaxed, that's a key second. And the third thing is, if you look at in terms of the transparency and the credibility of the numbers, for now almost, many years actually, I think at least more than a decade, that has not been the case with many budgets. Last year's budget made a very good beginning by laying out the extra budgetary resources in the speech. This time there is nothing off budget at all. I think that's a very, very important change, and all the projections, including the growth rate, the tax buoyancy, non-tax, everything has been done very well. So this is therefore I think foundational and a very, in some sense actually a dream budget. I think on the GST recommendations, as the Finance Secretary was saying, the structure, especially on the compliance part, has been really worked on. Ma'am also mentioned in her budget speech that she would be working with the GST Council to enable some rationalization. I think we'll have to wait for that statement of intent to actually get operationalized in the GST Council. But I think the intent itself, declared in the budget, is a very good sign. I would, as an economist, I would say that is something that should be done. With now the structure getting enabled and very good buoyancy coming, I think the rationalization will only provide a further fillip to the GST revenue. Okay.
Now talking about the issue of disinvestment, a lot of people are saying, especially those in the opposition, that it's like selling families' assets, families' silver, because now you've decided to have a timeline as well. This year as well, disinvestment has got a very aggressive target. First, is it realistic? And second, your response to this argument of selling families' silver, the only assets that we have?
See, this comparison with the silver, if you see historically, if you see many public assets, the public assets, some, maybe 20 years back could be a silver, but today it is not worth anything, right? So it's not that what you consider as a silver is something is going to remain silver forever, because what the history has taught us and the experience of past few decades have taught us that the government should not be in business of running companies, going by our overall approach that minimum governance and minimum governance. Government should be in areas, in a very, very minimum number of areas. In fact, the policy which the Finance Minister has announced, that the government would be in only, very, very few strategic sectors. There are the 4 strategic sectors, and within that also, in a very minimum number of public sector companies will be there. Rest all has to be disinvested. The private, those who need to be in that kind of a business, they should be there. So the government has to make way for them, so that the economic gain and then the efficiency, can be achieved, and then the people at large should be benefited. So therefore, a comparison of public, the silver and the selling the silver, it should not be taken from that particular point of view.
Okay. And
let me add, actually, yes. I think there are problems with both those words, family and silver. Because the entire economy should be considered as family, not just the public sector, and especially in an economy like India, where 90% of if you take the GDP, consumption and investment comes from the private sector. So I think private sector can actually feel offended by them not being included in the family. Number one.
Okay.
Second, as Finance Secretary very rightly mentioned, that this argument that it is silver actually has long been discredited. And if you would recall last year's economic survey on privatization and wealth creation, the first chart showed how the announcement of the privatization of Bharat Petroleum, BPCL versus HPCL, showed that the value increased by about 54,000 crores. In other words, if you take the entire economy as the family, the value of the family increased by 54,000 crores just based on the announcement. So neither the family part is correct nor the silver part is correct. Okay. And these are basically just, sort of in some sense, as a Hindi mein bolte na, ghita pisa arguments, actually words that are being used. So it enhances the value of of the assets in the family, and therefore this is something which is highly recommended.
Okay.
When you take it, put it together with the enterprise policy that was announced as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and which the finance minister has actually talked about, and the strategic, just 4 strategic sectors. I think these are all excellent moves, especially in a country where the first industrial policy had given the commanding heights of the economy to the public sector. Now we're actually, really implementing, giving the commanding heights of the economy to the private sector, and implementing what the Honorable Prime Minister talks about, minimum government and maximum governance.
We are in conversation with the team behind Budget 2021, and today we are joined by Dr. T.V. Somanathan, who is the Expenditure Secretary. We also have with us Mr. Tuhin Pandey, the Disinvestment Secretary. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for speaking with us here on Times Now. I'm Heena Gambhir, and Dr. Somanathan, let me begin this discussion with you. A lot of people are talking about the kind of expenditure plan that's there this year, 34.83 crores versus the revised estimate of 34.50 lakh crore last year. Now the question is, there is a lot of dependence upon borrowing in this year as well. Why so?
See, are you talking about the coming year or the
upcoming year,
yeah,
FY22?
The upcoming year will see some revival.
12 lakh crore is something that you're looking to borrow.
Right.
Yeah.
You will see a revival in tax revenue in the coming year, but it will still not be enough to make up for the loss of basically 1 year of GDP growth, which has happened between 2019 and 2020. And at the same time, we are very keen that expenditure must not be a reason for growth to be held back, particularly productive capital expenditure. So in order to keep capital expenditure high, we have moved the expenditure figure up to 34.83 lakh crores, which you mentioned. And a realistic estimate of revenues, which is what we have tried to do without being over optimistic or projecting something that may not materialize. So in every aspect of this budget, realism has been an underlying feature. So the expenditure projections are realistic, the revenue projections are realistic, and that leaves a gap which needs to be filled, and that gap is of the order of 12 lakh crores. But if we can get the growth process back, then we should see more buoyant tax revenues in the years coming after that, and that should enable us to come back to a lower level of fiscal deficit.
But sir, last year was a difficult year. We all know that. GST, which is a big source of revenue for you, was badly hit. But this year, as you're going to begin the next financial year, you're going to have probably a GST collection of about 1+ lakh crore. That's the trend that has been. So despite that, you are aiming for a 12 lakh crore borrowing plan?
That's right. Because while the GST revenues may be rising, see, direct tax revenues have a lag. And this is a very bad year for many businesses.
But then you extended the deadline as well for
That's right, but
filing
the profits
taxes.
are down. Profits are down. If profits are down, however much you may extend the deadline, if a profit-making company becomes a loss-making company, the entire income tax is lost. It's not a proportionate decline. It is not that when the growth comes from, say, 6% to -6%, that's not the proportion in which the direct tax revenues fall. When a company goes from a profit to a loss, the tax goes from, say, X to 0. So we do have to be very careful about estimating tax revenues for next year, both for individuals, many people are out of jobs, and companies, many of whom have made losses. It will take time for them to redeem themselves, come out of the losses, and then return to a normal profit cycle with normal tax revenue.
But I'm sure you're banking a lot on his department.
Oh, yes.
So is the target for this year realistic, sir?
Yes, I think it's a realistic target and we are hopeful of achieving it.
Okay. And are we likely to see a fresh pipeline for FY22, or the pipeline that you're already working with is something that you will continue to work with?
No, I think if you really notice, Honorable Finance Minister has announced a very big directional shift in the policy of the government vis-a-vis the public sector enterprises. And the public sector enterprises include the public sector banks as well as public sector insurance companies. What has been stated is that there will be 4 broad sectors in which a bare minimum presence of the public sectors will be going forward, will be allowed, will be retained, and the rest will be open for privatization or for merger or consolidation. Then there are the non-strategic sectors. The enterprises can be privatized. Of course, it will take time. There will be a roadmap, but it is a very important directional shift that the business in which except for where we require for national security or energy security or for critical infrastructure or for financial services, the rest of it actually can be put into this private hands. And this policy, which takes shape, gets implemented over a period of 4 to 5 years, because actually disinvestment will be dependent on timing, sequencing and so on. But it will be a very important growth path for the economy structurally, because ultimately it will unleash the productivity, it will unleash the growth momentum, and consequently employment in the economy.
Now, talking about the fiscal deficit targets, it's quite a bold one that we have for this year as well as for next year and the path that we have. What was the rationale behind exceeding it, beyond 7.5%, which was the broad expectation of the economists?
I think basically the economists were wrong, because
Okay.
I think they were reading too much into very short-term trends. This is not a year when trend following will get you an estimate. A lot of them have been looking at the average expenditure between April and November, whereas in fact if you look at the curve or the way the expenditure, it's been suddenly much higher after October, which is a conscious policy that we followed. So it's very difficult for an outside analyst to estimate how that curve will behave in the remaining 4 months of the year. And I think that is where most of them got it wrong. So many of them were projecting aggregate expenditure to be somewhere like 30.5 or 31 lakh crores, when in fact the figure is going to be 34.5. Part of that extra expenditure is because we have onboarded some of the food subsidy, which was earlier treated as off budget. That accounts for about 1 lakh crore. But the rest of it is actually what is the normal flow of expenditure that we had planned, and they're part of the packages that we had announced. I think there was a lot of skepticism about the packages. People thought that it'll all be accommodated by a reprioritization. We've done a substantial amount of reprioritization. In spite of that, this is the expenditure increase we have.
Okay.
So I think it was an error in prediction rather than anything.
So what about the LIC IPO? It was announced last year. At what stage is it right now? How soon can we expect it to hit the market?
LIC IPO, which was announced just in the last budget, we have a lot of preparation required for that IPO.
Okay.
LIC, as you know, is one of the largest financial organization, very old organization too. And for any IPO, you require a lot of issues to be settled in terms of accounts, in terms of, and more importantly, in case of insurance company, the embedded value, which LIC was not doing it in the normal course because it had got exemption. So that process has been set into motion.
Okay.
Now the legislative amendments which are required to enable LIC IPO to take place is being carried forward along with this Finance Act.
Okay.
And with both things in place, we hope to complete the IPO during this year.
Which means this calendar year, or anytime soon, anytime
this financial year.
Government always talks in terms of financial years.
And it will depend upon because as you know that it's a very, very large thing. So therefore you have to really time it and as per the market.
Okay. Sir, I was also going through that specific chart that was there in the budget fine print, which is about where money is actually going. And what I noticed was that as far as the central schemes are concerned, the amount as compared to last year is slightly higher, from 13% last year to 14% this year. For subsidies specifically, it has gone up from 6 to 8%. For states, it has gone down from 20 to 16%. We've also seen the introduction of cess coming, which the centre does not share with states. Excise duty has come down. Is there any thought of probably keeping this expenditure via centre and not, sharing the revenue with states? I mean, but that's how it's coming across. That's why I want your clarification.
No, I don't think there is any such conscious attempt. We are implementing the recommendations of the Finance Commission. The recommendations on tax devolution are being implemented in full. The recommendations on revenue deficit grant. So I think some of what you're seeing is the difference between the COVID pandemic, when a lot of special provisions were made, and some of those provisions which are not continuing into next year. I'm not able to comment on that specific number.
Okay.
But there has been no attempt to, in fact, the provision for vaccine, which is 35,000 crores, will actually go to the states. It's been provided in the head of transfer to states.
Why has subsidy amount gone up?
Subsidy has gone up because we have onboarded the food subsidy, which
Okay,
used to
there's
be
no
partly
additional
off-balance sheet.
subsidy.
No, there are no new subsidies.
Okay.
We have realistically estimated the value of the food subsidy, the fertilizer subsidy, etc., and shown it in the books.
Okay.
Earlier, a part of the food subsidy was being given as extra budgetary resources through the National Small Savings Fund.
Okay.
So, for example, the budget estimate for food subsidy in the current year was 1,22,000 or so. Next year, it's 2,50,000. That is not necessarily because anything great has increased in the food subsidy. It is because we are showing the full food subsidy as part of the budget.
Okay.
So that will show an increase in the reflected subsidy number in the budget.
Yes, that's there. So I also want to ask you about Air India's privatization process. At what stage are we right now? Are we likely to see that finishing in this financial year or FY22?
I think that will be, we would have liked it to be finished in this financial year, but it could probably be spilling over.
Okay.
Spilling over to maybe the first quarter.
At what stage is it right now? How many bidders actually qualified?
Well, I'm afraid I cannot divulge that.
You just said multiple bids.
Yes, I'm afraid. I think the reason behind is that we need competitive bids and we do not want one competitor to know who else is bidding.
What is your view on the trajectory of the fiscal roadmap that has been given?
As the Finance Minister clearly mentioned in her speech, so the coming year will be a fiscal deficit of 6.8% is what is projected. And it is intended to bring that down to 4.5% of GDP by 25-26, which means over a 4-year period. So in 4 years, the deficit is intended to come down to below 4.5. We have not specified the number, but we have specified it will be below 4.5. So that requires, it depends on the rate of growth. It depends on the rate of growth of taxes and the compliance, and of course expenditure planning as well. But I think with these three devices, we are quite optimistic that we'll be able to achieve this consolidation. And again, it's a realistic and achievable roadmap. That is why we are not going with anything which looks good but may not be achievable.
Right, gentlemen, thank you very much, both of you, for speaking with us here on Times Now and explaining to us the rationale behind some of the bold decisions that have been announced in Budget 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you.